It's May 29th, 2020, and this is No Sports, Day 78. And a fitting topic to discuss today, which pro sports league in North America will actually be able to come back first? Now, I realize you're already asking, what about NASCAR? What about UFC? They've both returned. Yes, I understand, but I'm talking about traditional team sports and leagues like Major League Baseball, Major League Soccer, the NBA, NHL, and NFL. I think what we've realized of all those leagues, whoever comes back first is definitely going to reap some significant benefits. And not just financially in terms of TV ratings and popularity, but also there is an image thing attached to it, right? You're going to kind of seem heroic if you can come back and give the public what it desires right now, a bit of entertainment and a bit of sanity. But there's also this catch-22 for anybody who comes back, kind of a dilemma. You're going to take a huge risk of not only your people, but also your image. How would it look if a league comes back, in retrospect, what was deemed way too early or without all the thoughtful precautions to do it right? We're not going to look back so fondly at a league that tried to get something done, it was mismanaged, didn't come out well, and then, hypothetically, the coronavirus pandemic spikes and maybe they have to shut it down. Or maybe they contribute, and I hate to even think about this, they contribute to making it worse in a public sense. So 3 elements to consider here for each league in trying to come back. There's 3 things that all of these different sports have to face and have to get past. The first is format changes of your actual game itself or your match, like how many games, when do you play them, where do you play them? So the format itself, not the biggest hurdle, but definitely something that everybody has to agree with. Number 2 is the human element. How do you keep all your people safe on and off the field or court or ice or pitch? How do you make this happen so that everybody can feel good about it? Not just the players, their families, the coaching staffs, equipment, trainers, everybody involved that is a supporting role around a team. How do you make sure everybody around this stays safe from a health standpoint? And then lastly, but definitely not least, is the money aspect. And that is very, very difficult and complex and complicated because everything is kind of getting restructured. If there's no fans and less games, there's definitely less revenue and less pie to be shared. How do you do that? So my answer when you look at all these leagues, if you're going to put me on the spot and say which league should come back first, which one has the best path to do that, I think it's Major League Baseball. On paper, they should have it easiest. But right now, I would not say they are necessarily the most likely to come back first. So just because I mentioned that, let's dig into baseball here first. They have 2 of those 3 things basically figured out. The format of how they're going to play, how many games, where they do it, that's all laid out. They've also got the human elements somewhat figured out. That's not the main sticking point right now. It seems like they've kind of agreed in principle on a lot of those things. It's the money part that's going to be tough to get through. And that's sad because baseball has achieved those first 2 hurdles. They went through them, so to speak. And again, I want to be careful about this because I think as the situation develops, more questions might come up. And as you get closer to it, more specific questions might come up. Will players get tested every day? What happens if somebody does test positive? How do meetings happen between players? Again, but the money part is so hard to figure out. A prorated salary and then a pay cut on top of that. I understand it's millions of dollars being discussed here, which is something you and I probably can't relate with. I don't know about you. I definitely can't. But there's so much on the line here, not just now, but in the future moving forward. right? Negotiations, this is not their first time at the table. This is definitely not their last time at the table. So what precedent does this intersection mean? What precedent does it set in the future moving forward? So that's baseball. Again, it's a sport where it's outdoors. There's distance. There are things they could do to minimize the health risk of players and their families. There are a lot of, avenues I see. They could make this work. But they face the money part. The NHL. Now, I know everybody got excited about the return to play format. They heard about 24 teams, straight to the playoffs. Like it's a sure thing. They're going to pick these 2 hub cities out of 10, and it's going to be a guaranteed thing to happen. I want to point out the NHL has only really announced with the Players Association they fully agree on a format. That's it. The human elements have not been discussed. The money aspect has not been discussed. And it's not to say that they can't get through those things. Maybe they have an easier time with it than baseball does. But they haven't been discussed. Not just that, but the NHL also faces the fact that players have not widespread had access to any ice surfaces. And they're going to have to go through an expedited training camp all over again. Hand-eye coordination's not going to be there for weeks at a time here. So you're talking about safety potentials of players coming back just forced to hit the gas pretty quickly as opposed to ramping into a season. It's going to be tough. And not to mention, last thing on the NHL, what will they do with their next season? How far back can you push that? Because if you start playing games in late July, you're probably not done until September or October something. So do you start the next season in December? You'd probably have to. The NBA. Technically, the NBA, I think, should have it easier than most leagues based on one simple fact. They have less players. You could get by with a dozen guys per team, and it's not like a baseball roster where it's more than twice that, or even a hockey roster with significantly more players, or football, obviously. There's a ton of guys that have to fit in a locker room in football. It doesn't have to be that way in the NBA, but basketball is kind of a hygienic nightmare. Baseball doesn't really have players sweating all over each other. It does have spitting, right? But I think you can curtail that. Like basketball, what do you do with two big men on the low post? One's backing into the other, dripping sweat. One guy's got an arm bar on the other, defending. The visuals, right? It's just a ton of bodily fluids. How else to put it? So that's a very hard part. The NBA seems like they want to take the bubble approach, right? They'd rather go to maybe even just one hub location. And they also have it better than the NHL because the NHL wants to go to 2 cities. Are you going to play 4 games a day on one ice surface? That's going to be a really rough ice surface, especially in summer months. Logistically, how do you do that? Very difficult. At least with basketball, heck, you could play games all day long. Morning, early afternoon, late afternoon, evening, maybe a nightcap. It wouldn't matter. They could pull that off easier in hockey in certain ways. But again, they want to take that bubble approach. At this point here in late May, I don't know, that's totally different from baseball who wants to spread it out. Is it a good idea? Is it more dangerous to contain everybody and semi-quarantine them all in one spot? Don't know. And just like the NHL, the NBA only has a little bit of their season left, their regular season left. Do you want to just blow that off? Do you want to go straight to the playoffs like the NHL is hoping to do? Big question. Soccer, Major League Soccer, they already started their season, so that makes this even more interesting. They already went through training camps and they played matches already. But here's the real question. Do they also want to take the bubble approach? How does that work in terms of a pitch? Can you play 4 games a day on a pitch? Does it work? Maybe, maybe not. The one thing that soccer has going differently than all the other leagues, Major League Soccer can watch the German league, how they've started, the successes and struggles that they've had in a couple weeks. And I realize baseball can watch the Korean league, which I know they've done and I know they've learned a few things. But you're also going to have the top league in the world, the Premier League, starting up hopefully in mid-June. So Major League Soccer will have some examples to follow, some specific examples of how other people are pulling this off. And if they can be a carbon copy of something else successful, I definitely think that benefits them. Not to mention, they're an outdoor sport, and they're not necessarily a contact sport. So they don't have to face everything that hypothetically basketball does or even hockey does in the communication of a disease, and being close to other players. And anyway, but that brings me last to the NFL, who has time on their side, right? They need to start training camps. Maybe they eliminate the preseason somehow or cut it down to one game. And there are some flexibility options for the NFL because they just don't have to start or they weren't already in season. They are also going to go through it a little bit easier because they are more of a TV sport. Every game nationally televised. So they don't rely as much. They do on fans and attendance, but they don't rely as much on fans being in seats to make all of their revenue. They make it in so many different ways to large amounts. Football also has this going for them. They wear helmets. All of them do. And a lot of them wear gloves. And if you could find a way to make a face mask more like a medical surgical mask, right? Complete plastic across the front, and this would be a push, but if you could find a way that most all players are wearing gloves while they play, is everybody safer? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but I know there are at least some realistic options for the NFL to protect its players in simple ways. Again, I know every quarterback is not going to want to put a glove on their throwing hand or even their opposite hand. Nor would every receiver or running back. It's a preference thing. Could you force them into doing it if that was the only way or if that made it better? Maybe there's a chance there. And the NFL is also outdoors. It's a contact sport. You can maintain some distance, although I would have to say on the line of scrimmage, every snap, you got guys right in each other's faces. So I don't know how exactly that works. And then the last thing to point out about the NFL, they just seem like the only league right now which is operating relatively unaffected. And maybe that's because they haven't had to change much. They're completely in their most off-season part of the calendar year. So they haven't had to face as much of the obstacles and time crunch as other leagues have. But they will soon. And I'm also not sure if that doesn't affect us type approach. I'm wondering how that comes across to a lot of people who are definitely going to want sports to return in the safest way when it's time. So again, my answer would be who comes back first. I think baseball should have the easiest path, but I don't think right now that seems the likeliest. Who will come back first? I can't wait to watch this video someday in the future and know the answer to the question I have right now. This has been No Sports, Day 78.